Okay, let's try this again. I got interrupted on the last one. Kind of winding down on my enthusiasm for this, as well as everything else in life. But this is the fantasy section of the walkthrough Ahistory. Not to be confused with the walkthrough history. The thing is, fantasy games always, in concept, really, really excited me. But when it came to the actual execution of most of them, I was not terribly thrilled with what I found in them. We'll see how this works out as we go through them. The first one is a recent acquisition of mine, Age of Gods. This was actually a lot of fun. Right after I kind of dissed the whole flavor, the whole genre. Fun in the sort of way that, I don't know. Because it's so cheesy looking and everything. So built for kind of the Warhammer type lover of fantasy. And there's tons of stuff out for somebody who wants things that look either silly or unrealistic or whatever. And maybe you want to picture this very cartoonish view of of fantasy type stuff. I'm not terribly fond of that, but I think the game itself actually worked very well as a game. Euro feeling maybe kind of a little. Arakar's Wand, I don't know what the hell this is. This is from Best of the Dragon. I think it was this terrible little hunt for magic items or something. I don't know. What do I have that I say about it? They're trying to find and steal a magic wand from the evil player. Yeah, there's a couple of spells and stuff. Those were pretty cheesy games coming out of the Dragon. When you get one that worked at all well, it was kind of a bonus. This one wasn't up there. Barbarian Kings. Now, this was an an Ares game. This was the game that got me into Ares, right? I saw the magazine for it, and I said, I need to have this. And I opened my subscription up to Ares, hoping to get this one. It didn't come to me. I got the next one, I think. But I visited SPI and bought this one specifically. They still had it in their office. This was a really, really cool game. Although it's plotted movement, which is usually anathema, and plotted spells and everything else. It was kind of this nice, very, very simple version, almost a diplomacy type feel, but you had a CRT, you had all these special kind of units and everything, but the plotting and the multiplayer aspect all made it kind of feel a little bit like a diplomacy or Machiavelli. A lot of fun, not really complex in terms of the number of pieces that you have to deal with or whatever. And hopefully I'll be able to get that to the table. I have Rocky and Bullwinkle and Rocky. This is, I wish I could pull it out just to show you. This is a game that comes with little plastic hand puppets, like you used to get at McDonald's with the Happy Meals before they started throwing more complex toys in. This is sort of a storytelling game. You play cards to advance the story. Now, you have to get rid of your cards and work them into the story and achieve certain goals for your characters. And it's kind of like Once Upon a Time for this, except you got these little puppets and I think it's a lot less. I haven't played it much at all. I have it listed as basically one playing. Ryan only gave it a 7, and I gave it the highest rating out of everyone there. It didn't have the same sort of open storytelling aspect that Once Upon a Time has. Instead, it felt more like you're trying to win the game and tell a story as an afterthought. That's the way the game presented itself. I'm sure maybe people could try to play it in a more Once Upon a Time-ish sort of way, but somehow it just never promoted that. Citadel of Blood. Now this was you draw chits and build sort of a random dungeon out of them. And Death Maze, I think, used the same basic system. Citadel of Blood made me feel kind of goofy because it kept me from buying Death Maze, basically. I probably would have bought Death Maze. This is a solitaire game. You have a small set of characters and you're just randomly drawing rooms. It's not much better than, say, just playing D&D with the random dungeon creation. I think AD&D had this, where you just roll up rooms and roll up monsters, and just completely random stuff happens. Well, this would be a step more towards a game. You have an actual goal. You have this hellgate you have to destroy or whatever. My guess was Death Maze wasn't significantly more interesting, so I never picked it up. City States of Arcliral, this is Task Force Games. Task Force Games put out all these little tiny games, a lot of them on fantasy or science fiction. Most of them not very good. I didn't rate this very well. A couple of my friends rated it okay. It felt very generic. You're wandering around looking for magic items, and trying to conquer citadels. And it wasn't bad, it's just to me there was nothing in it that was exciting. On the other hand, Avalon Hill's Dark Emperor. Now this is a game that has a fundamental problem with it, which is that the evil player can prevent the good player from ever getting a turn for a long time. I've played it with people where, they basically had nothing to do for the entire length of time that they were playing, and then it's a fairly long game, so after like 6 hours of not being able to do anything and having to go home, they weren't thrilled with it. I'm happy to play either side, but my belief is that it takes more effort, it takes more skill and knowledge to play the dark player, and if you don't know what you're doing and you play them, it's probably going to be a fairly bad game for the dark player, just because if they can't control how the good player comes out, they still have stuff to do, but they're going to be very weak because if things get triggered early and the good player gets started early in the game, very quickly their position becomes untenable. So it's kind of I think it's a fairly balanced game, actually, if the dark player plays very well, but it's not very interesting for the kingdoms to be playing. I still think that it has some really cool ideas behind it. So among other things, you've got the magic items, you've got sort of this open diplomacy that you can go seek people out. It feels like there are a lot of choices, at least for the evil player, and a lot of exciting little elements to it. But I can see where the good player would be very bored facing that. It also has I think this is great custom. It has an intriguing sort of terrain where it's this planet that's basically not formed by geothermal and tectonic events, but by asteroids hitting the planet. So it's just a very different terrain style and looks kind of neat because of that. And I think it's fairly well done. Another Avalon Hill one, Dragon Hunt. This is actually a kind of interesting game. It doesn't feel like the big war game. Yeah, so Dark Emperor feels like kind of a war game. Dragon Hunt doesn't feel as much like one. Yeah, you've got things that you can go out and capture each other's villages with, but in general, you've got one goal, which is to kill the dragon, and to do that, you equip your hero. Having lots of villages and everything gets you more resources that you can equip your hero more easily with. But then I'm not sure how much it really comes down, to being this powerful military game. But it does have this interesting factor of, working to gain enough ability using these other soldiers, etc., who can fight each other. I found it a kind of interesting game. I was able to teach it to a fairly young kid, maybe 8 or 9 years old, without much problem. You know, along with other somewhat older kids when I first had it, and then you know, I think some of my friends have adopted a liking for it as well. We never played it much. Another one is Chaosium, but then Avalon Hill, Elric. This is sort of the definitive game on for a board game on the Elric story. Here you've got the players. It's hard to tell who the players really are. You start off kind of, I don't even remember what you start with. I think you start with kind of a random country, and you can make alliances with other countries just by kind of mustering them with chips, etc. You can gain control of heroes, etc. But it's not like you have a clear goal as a player. It's almost like playing something like Russian Civil War, the SPI game, where you're playing multiple sides. And there's two things. So you can either go for a victory by chaos or law, unbalancing the game, in which case whoever's got the most power in one of those wins. But I think it's also possible to get sort of, I don't remember it very well, but to get sort of a generic victory if you can keep the balance more or less aligned. And Elric shows up, and you can kind of control him for a while, but he'll end up killing whoever's controlling him and running away and doing other ill things. It's just, I mean, it certainly captures the feeling, if you were, you know, this alliance of kingdoms and Elric was wandering around, you get kind of that feeling with it. The problem is that the alliance of kingdoms thing, the order and chaos alignment that the kingdoms hold, etc., none of that really fits together perfectly. There's still a decent game here. It's just you feel like there's something almost missing in it. You'll see that with Magic Realm as well. King of the Tabletop, this became Kings and Things. I really liked it as King of the Tabletop, I thought, but then when I played it again, it got a 6 maybe from prior memories. It was good for a dragon game. It's not good for a game on its own, and I think King of the Tabletop, I think Kings and Things, I've been unwilling to buy at any high price because I don't remember liking it terribly much more than King of the Tabletop, which only got a 6 from me. Lost Worlds, I did a review on this. These are these little books, kind of like Ace of Aces, where you get to pick actions and you reflect each other against, you know, you get to see what your opponent's doing exactly, and they get to see what you're doing, and your choices, it's almost like this huge rock, paper, scissors, but your choices affect one another. And the problem with it, of course, is you can learn what the better results are there. Magic Realm, played this recently with my wife. This is, so the rule book for this is just hideous, but the game itself has a lot of interesting factors to it. It's a bitch to set up. It's a pain in the royal ass to read the rules. Once you know them more or less, it's not too terrible, especially if you decide not to like hunt down exactly what should happen in some specific case, because you may not be able to figure it out from the rules, but the main flow of the game is actually pretty easy. A lot of it's just the setup, and then there's kind of the, okay, I get how combat works, and it really ends up kind of random how combat works. It seems very clever, but it turns out that you can like set it up so that, this is the non-random part, you can set it up so that you're like undefeatable by one monster, or you can look at it and say, I'm screwed and maybe I get a chance on a 1 or a 2 or whatever. So there's a lot of, once you can see the combat and understand it, there's a lot of thought that goes into the particular puzzle you're facing at any given time. But usually there's only one answer, right? And then it comes down to either you automatically win or lose, or you roll a die and a third of the time you win or lose or whatever. You know, it's usually pretty simple that way. But with all the spells, with the magic items, it's exciting what you're able to find and what you're able to do. You're able to make little deals with other people and work with them especially, deals that'll impact combat. But in the end, it's missing something that Wizards has. We'll get to that in a moment, which is this sort of overarching goal. In the end, you pick your victory conditions based on sort of this careers-like design. Hey, I'd like a fame, make that 2 fame, a notoriety, and an order of fries. A great treasure. And you've got to get these things, and once you get them all, then you run back to the inn and you win. There's different levels of characters, so you can start at earlier levels, but there's no progression. There's no character advancement. The only advancement in the game is, oh, look, I got a magic item that makes me a god, That's kind of disappointing. I've tried to finesse that by making it more of a talisman type victory where you're going to hunt the players down at the end. And I had partial success with that, but it still didn't fix it completely. Maybe it's just too big a game for what its goal is going to be no matter what. And Magic the Gathering, now I was a total addict of this, I came to it later. Well, not later, but I came to it. A lot of gamers came to gaming through Magic, maybe. I came to Magic when it came out. A couple of my friends brought it back from Gen Con the year it came out, and it was just crazy that year. It was like, none of us had too many cards, but we were so excited and playing for ante and for keeps with each other. And it was just really, really great. And then the thing started becoming valuable. Everybody's feeling changed, kind of. And you never played for ante anymore, except in special tournaments where that's all you did. We actually started devising those and having fun to try to recapture that original spark, but it never really happened because the cards had value, so people would withdraw their valuable cards from the tournaments because they didn't want to risk them. Once upon a time, I covered this. This is really almost not a game. You can play it as a game. It's got victory conditions and everything, but when it comes down to it, instead of trying to win, you should be trying to work together to create a story. You can still be trying to win. You can still be dominating the story with your own words, etc. But don't make the story a secondary part to winning. Always keep the story as the important thing, and winning is the secondary. Pentacle, this was a fun little card game where the object is to drive all your opponents insane or kill them. It's sort of like a very... a prototype of Magic the Gathering. You send, you summon up this critter and you send it walking over to attack, and some other things like battle cards and stuff like that kind of had this same feeling before Magic came on the scene. Now, Magic was just for me, Magic was such a jump. I knew about things like Pentacle, but, the combination of the complexity of the game, etc., was just so different from Pentacle, where it's now you're getting you're getting a demon to come visit you, and what do? Pentacle is much more structured and limited in terms of what you can do, but it was pretty exciting in its time. Search for the Emperor's Treasure. This was another. I don't remember what this is. This was something silly, almost a children's game with these, but sort of a pure strategy game. Wait, no. Players wander around searching for locations on clue cards. Tell them where they can find. No, this had to be a TS. Yeah, this was a Best of the Dragon one. I don't remember what the hell this is. Again, not worth playing. Sorcerer. This was a weird game. A friend of mine found a deluxe edition of this, I guess, used, and bought it for me for a present. Really, really weird game where everything's this multicolored board where the movement is based on connectivity by colors, I think, and all the creatures, etc., are summoned up out of the magic of the color that you're on. I don't remember a hell of a lot about it, but it had a completely different system from anything else. It didn't match into any kind of thought. It was almost like this abstract chaos world where, castles are growing up and monsters are being created from the chaos. It felt almost ambrish in that. Spellbinder, this was really cheesy kind of. This is I think Task Force games again, where you're battling over these terrain objectives with wizards and troops, and you use your wizards to harm and regenerate. And in a lot of ways, it's not that different from something like Barbarian Kings, but it just seemed so much less classy and so much more Task Force gamey that I just wasn't impressed. Swords and Sorcery, I played this. I've got one solitaire playing. This was an old SPI game. It's got killer penguins in it. Whoa, there's multiple different games. I didn't know about that. It's a particularly silly game, which appears to be the world that SPI players did kind of their role-playing in. The military game was fairly standard, although there's magic and monsters in it. There's diplomacy with neutrals where you roll on a table, kind of like you'll see in something like Outpost, or not Outpost, Outreach. Yeah, confuse everything. And then there's a quest game, which has quest players and villain players. This is kind of like John Carter, where the villains are trying to protect a quest object, and anyone can gain points by completing that quest. But I guess if the villain's able to hold on to it, they get points. I don't remember it very well at all. Like I said, I only have one solitaire playing, so I didn't explore this game much. This was one that my dad picked up, and I didn't get to look at until after I left my first wife. So that was kind of a weird period, and I haven't seen it since that original period, I think. Talisman. Yeah, this is Monopoly with monsters, right? You roll a die, you walk around. It's not like Monopoly. It's nowhere near as cool. You roll a die, you walk around, you find a monster that you gotta fight. You roll dice to see if you beat it. If you kill it, you get something. If you don't, you lose something. And eventually, once you're potent enough, you wander up to the middle of the board and find out if you win or if you're stuck playing the game forever because you've got an unwinnable victory condition. In the original one, you actually have kind of one of the better victory conditions, but as you add the expansions, it becomes one of the expansions, I don't remember which one, Adventure, or the expansion itself, you end up adding this deck of cards that changes the victory conditions. And then some of the expansions were pretty cool, like the dungeon was really cool, it actually sped up the game. The timescape was kind of cool. The city, I've got mixed feelings about. It never really, it felt like such a cool idea, but in some ways it gave too many advantages, like you could walk in and become the High Mage or whatever just by turning in a talisman that you found somewhere. And that was pretty powerful because you now have become like this fairly potent spellcasting character, which is better than most of the characters. On the other hand, there was a lot of nothing in there. Most of the adventures, etc., most of the cards that you drew from there weren't terribly useful. And then the final expansion I had were the dragons, and that completely ruined the main board as far as I could tell. It added tremendous numbers of very, very potent creatures that made it impossible to play on that main board for the beginning of the game, when you first start out with your character. Unless you just stumbled upon something that was really great. Bonus for this, I found it at a Goodwill. I was broke as hell at the time. This was the first year I was with my first wife. We weren't married. We didn't get married for a long time. But, we could barely find money for food, scrape it together. And we found this, and the expansion, and the dungeon, and I don't think the timescape, but both expansions and the dungeon. It was, had to be under $5 for the set. When we opened the boxes in the store, they were filled with minis. All the minis that went with all of these games were in there. The base game was $1.69. Each of the expansions was like under $1. So I spent under $5. But we had to scrape together money, bring bottles back just to get $5. We were that poor. So that was a great find. It was the first edition of Talisman, so they were black and white cards, and the board was black and white. She and I kind of painted them to make them look pretty. We'd done that with a couple of things. So we really kind of owned the game in a special sort of way. Alright. So as you can see, nothing's ever seamless here. So I was, already not only a gamer, but very, very aware that I didn't much like the game when we bought it, but it was just such a cool thing. I have some good memories of it under those terms, and that's why I've given it about a 6, even though I'm not terribly impressed with the game as a whole. And actually, in its base version, I kind of like it. Next one I've got here is Titan, which I like a lot better as a game, but I've only given a 7 to. Because, again, I expect more. Granted, it's odd that I gave Talisman a 6. I think I'm always kind of bopping between 5 and 6 on it. How much do I enjoy it? How much do I not? I think the enjoyment that I take from it is often not my own enjoyment, but someone else's. So it's a game that I can bring to other people who otherwise, maybe I couldn't game with at all. I certainly couldn't do the things that I most like. And in particular, it's something that I can, bring. I remember playing this with people who just, were not a part of my gaming crew at all. That I felt comfortable with saying, oh, hey, this is something we can do and have fun with. Role players, whatever. Titan. So yeah, this one's a little bit more of a serious game, but it's such a weird game. The tactical combat is fine on it, but the actual campaign board where you're playing to win is very different. Now this is a game where your goal is to wipe out the other players, and that causes problems in any game, right? Where you hunt them down one by one, and eventually, it comes down to there being 2 or 3 players just fighting it out for a long time. If you're playing in a group where there's nothing else to do, like, let's say you only have, say, 4 or 5 players total, well, there's people who are going to be dropped out and have nothing to do for a while. I remember being on much the worst situation where we had about 10 people, and somehow I ended up in a Titan game because maybe some people are coming late or whatever, and I ended up the 3rd player in a game that just would not end. Things that I really wanted to play were getting played next to me, as opposed to Titan, which I like just fine, but I could pretty much get a Titan game going anytime I wanted with some of the people that I was with. Some of these other games I didn't have a copy of, or it was hard to find people to play. Valkenburg Castle. This is kind of a weird, this is another Task Force game. Never played this too much. I gave it a 4. At the basic level, it's almost like an Azanti High Lightning type of game. This tactical game where you've got, these rooms and you're working your way through and fighting monsters to get to a specific goal. Great. The kind of cool thing about this one, though, that you'd think would make it better, but I actually ended up rating it, I think, worse than Azanti High Lightning, is there's this campaign game where between expeditions into the dungeon, you're, as the good player, as the Valkenburg player, you're gathering your troops together, you're paying them, and you design an expedition to go in and do some specific goal. And the goals could be to clear a level or to raid the dragon treasure or whatever. And eventually your plan is to take your castle back. And the evil player has some hidden traps, etc., that he can set up, where he's really kind of, playing almost like a dungeon master, but it's definitely a clearly opposed game. It's an interesting concept that just didn't play out as well as I had hoped. War of the Ring, as you know, this sucker is such a disappointment for me. I love the game, the concept. I was so excited about it, but when it came down to it, the army game, just, you have these huge stacks of units conflicting if somebody's going for a military victory, and if they're not, you just have the evil player spreading all his pieces out to look for the ring, I guess. It just, it usually comes down to a crapshoot of, oh look, did Frodo make it to the mountain, and are all the Nazgul there yet? Then maybe if Frodo wasn't alone, if he brought everyone with him, well, then it's pretty much doomed for the Nazgul, but just a small handful of good players can fight their way through the evil ones, as I showed in a recent, not in the video, but in a game with my current wife. War of Wizards, TSR, I got no idea what this is. Is this a Best of Dragon? I don't know where this came from, I don't know what it is. I got it in my thing. Warrior Knights, I have the Fantasy Flight Edition. The original GW edition always intrigued me. It was kind of like Kingmaker. It felt like it should be better than Kingmaker because it had more of the political side that really intrigued me about Kingmaker. But without the history, and with maybe the square board and the feel of the game, it never quite... It played better than Kingmaker did. It didn't have that horrible stasis that Kingmaker could get. But still, without the historical tie, it felt like, why am I playing this exactly? That's one of my problems. It doesn't feel like a fantasy game terribly, but it also isn't really tied to historical reality. There aren't dragons and magic and this, that, and the other in it. But there also isn't any, historical basis to it. And I don't know what to call these. It might belong in the fiction section, just because I don't think there is any magic. The Fantasy Flight version I actually enjoyed better. It took more of a path of, yeah, I'm just a game, right? It has these Euro-ish elements towards picking actions, etc. And I thought they worked very well in it, as opposed to, say, Twilight Imperium, where I thought the Euro-ish aspects didn't really create a good game. I thought Warrior Knights actually created a pretty good game out of this sort of semi-Euro, semi-Ameritrash type feel. Avalon Hill's Wizards. Now this was an interesting find. I don't remember, $15-20 plus shipping. I saw it used and said, this is something I've wanted, and I finally got to pick it up. It's never terribly well received, and in part that's because the rules are really, really bad for it. But the actual game is really an interesting game. You're in this race to acquire first enough power to be a full-fledged sorcerer, and then to acquire these magical gems to save the land. And the first player who collects all the gems goes to this special space and wins. He says, I saved the world, great. Okay, that sounds kind of cheesy. What's cool about it? Well, the world is disappearing in front of your eyes. Fairly soon, I believe it's 2 fortnights into the game, maybe the 3rd fortnight, something like that. Fairly soon into the game, and each turn's a day, really bad stuff starts happening. The game's made up of these little kind of hexagonal islands, which may not all be islands. They could be connected. They could be one solid landmass for all you know. But as they become each of these Fortnite turns, one of them selected at random, flipped over, and it's out of the game. It's like this black hole in the middle of the board. What's wrong with it, if anything? Now, I only rated it a 5. My wife gave it a 10 because she just absolutely loves it. I may be being a little too harsh on it. What I didn't like was the rules, first. And second, sort of the atmosphere. The game itself doesn't go... So what I want is this, maybe not to the same level of detail, but some of the feeling of, say, a Magic Realm, where I'm getting actual objects and they mean something. Here, you're drawing these little quest cards when you're trying to become more powerful, and you're going off to gather things and bring them to someone, and then you just get these points, and these points make you able to rise up in level if you go visit the right mage to get able to level up or whatever. It actually, I think, is a perfectly valid way of doing things. It just feels kind of funny to me, so I've been unwilling to give it the full rating that maybe it deserves. And on top of that, it gets penalized at least a point for those rules. Just like Magic Realm does. You make rules that bad, man. You're making the game really difficult to pick up and start playing. And this is a fantasy type game. You'd want it to be accessible maybe to a type of player who isn't as used to complicated games. It's kind of funny because there's sort of this dichotomy of there's the really simple fantasy game, the Talisman level, the Hero Quest, whatever, that doesn't go into a lot of detail. And then there's this huge jump. But it's not really in complexity. It's just in the rules. Somebody has failed. These are middling complexity games. Magic Realm, I know it's got this horrible reputation for being very complex. It's not. It really isn't. And I downloaded a 100-page rule book for it. This game, the original game, I haven't looked over that 100-page monstrosity, but the original game, as bad as the rules were, didn't need that many rules. What it needed was to take away this stupid programmed instruction plan and say, look, here's the whole game, and we'll make some of the rules optional and put them at the end. But the programmed instructional, and on top of it, optional rules on each scenario, or each level of difficulty. Ouch. Okay. Anyway, Wizards looks really promising. Wizards Quest, on the other hand, now this I only give a 6 to. Simple rules, simple game, nice components, but in the end there's not that much here. You're on this hunt for magic treasures, and it feels almost like Risk. You're fighting battles. This wizard hands out bonuses to you at random at the beginning of the turn. It's okay. It just never caught me. That's the end of my normal fantasy games, but now I come to some slightly different kinds. For example, Iron Dragon, which is a crayon rails game like Empire Builder, set in a fantasy setting. And in this case, there's some interesting little things like foremen who will build your track cheaper, lots of different terrain types, boats that you can take rather than connecting up your track everywhere. Boats tend to be a bad deal, but if you get them early on, they can save you a lot of money because you don't have to pay to travel. You don't have to buy the track to travel. So it's kind of cool. It's an interesting take on things. I gave it a 5, which is about what I give most of my crayon rails games. I think I gave Empire Builder a 6, just because it was sort of the progenitor, and it's kind of cleaner than some of the others. This one has a lot of details. It's harder to find stuff because it's not all America. In fact, no one from anywhere except Iron Dragon Land is going to know where these things are. On the other hand, my ex-wife, this was her favorite game of all time, I think. And I was going to leave it with her, along with a couple of other, of what we saw as kind of her game, but she decided, hey, I'm never going to play any games anyway. Baton Races of Yaz. This is another Best of the Dragon games. This is a sports type game. It was actually kind of good, kind of interesting. There's no real luck in this game except who gets to place the opponent's baton first. And it's kind of this strategy game where you're trying to race the batons across the board or something. Monsters of the Midway. This was, if I recall correctly, almost a Blood Bowl type game. I haven't played it, maybe ever. Okay, then to the role-playing side of things. And obviously, fantasy is a rich, rich era for role-playing. I'm not going to cover it in too much detail, but I'm going to look at some key points here. Amber. Amber was such a brilliant idea, this. A role-playing game where you don't roll any dice. I've tried some sort of freestyle stuff where I played with a deck of cards or whatever, but this one had actually a system and design and everything, but the GM makes all the decisions based on the strategies of the opposing players. It's almost designed as though the players are in conflict with each other, as opposed to as much being in conflict with the NPCs or whatever. Designed that way in the sense that they're put into the roles of what feel like characters from the books who all distrust each other entirely and are vying for position against each other. There's the concept of the Throne War game. It's really great in sort of a convention scenario where you just come in and you don't know any of these people, but you're all playing for these secret goals of your own. It's also good in a campaign. I set it up in a campaign where... the game kind of suggests that you be, in a campaign, that you be the children of the real Amberites from the book. Well, I found that to be a little bit too dull a scenario, but I didn't want to assign people the characters like I've seen done in a convention regularly. Instead, we did the full bidding, where if you bid more than somebody else on something, you're just better than them at that. And proportionally by how much more you bid. So if you're just a little, a point or two above them, you're not terribly better than them. Everybody had sort of their own goals, but it didn't break out into the complete war type scenario that the books did. On the other hand, that's okay, because I only had like 4 players and about 8 or so NPCs that I threw into it, and I drew little tarot cards for each character, and it was really very cool. I had a lot of fun with that. Played other ones in similar circumstances, but didn't get to play very long. A friend of mine did a campaign of that. Let's see what else I have. SPI's Dragon Quest. A friend of mine really wanted to do this. He converted something that we touched Albion in the non-fantasy stuff. He tried to convert Albion into a Dragon Quest world. Dragon Quest really belongs in the Swords and Sorcery world. Though that is the campaign game for Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest never impressed me too much. It's got some interesting ideas, the colors of magic and these 3 moons or suns or whatever and their influence. But a lot of weirdness, not sketched out with the richness that, say, a RuneQuest, or here's another one, Empire the Petal Throne might have. Powers and Perils. I don't know if this is the one or if it's a different one. There is an Avalon Hill game, and it's either this or Lords of Creation, not sure which one, that had these brilliant ideas in it. That when I looked at them, they kind of aligned with some of the things I was thinking, and I've kind of stolen some stuff from it when I was starting to create role-playing game. I don't remember which one I've got here. All I can say is one of those two has some really weird and interesting ideas as to skill acquisition, etc. Rolemaster. So Rolemaster is sort of the poster child for the let's make a game as detailed as we possibly can. And, once you start adding the companion skills in, especially, you're getting to, I have skill in tying my shoes, and skill in picking nose, and all these other things. Basically, if you want to do anything, you got to roll dice for it, fine, and you can advance in it. Advancement here is done by purchasing, though, from points that you get by going up levels, which you mainly get points by killing monsters or walking in some cases, or sacrificing gems, or whatever it is. But essentially you're getting experience points handed to you the same way that you would in, say, a D&D game. There are complicated methods of calculating these all out. It's probably best if the GM actually just hands out some at the end of each session, with a little tweaking to indicate who did well. Problem with it? Well, there's no real learning of skills. You don't have to do anything to learn a skill. I used to put, you had to collect a dot in a skill. Basically, you had to use it sufficiently to gain the right to advance in it. And if you didn't, you could find somebody to train you, or you could spend some time practicing or whatever. But if you didn't specifically do something to earn the right to learn it, you couldn't learn it. And that helped a little bit. One thing I found, the last time I played it, I converted, I used to play it in Middle-earth all the time, and it didn't work terribly well there as far as I'm concerned. It felt like too heavy a magic system for the world. Middle-earth doesn't react well to sorcerers firing off spells here and there and getting to any level of power. Rolemaster also has an interesting idea. A first-level character, if that's what you start at, you're worse than just about everyone in the world. I mean, your average soldier. So D&D has kind of this, your first level, you're the cream of the crop. You're the ones who can advance. Well, in Rolemaster, the average person is like 3rd to 5th level. And that's fine for soldiers, but 3rd to 5th level, you're potent as a spellcaster already. You're making a big advance compared to what a first level spellcaster can do in Rolemaster. And that's kind of an iffy thing. And another is, if you allow spellcasters and you let them live for any length of time above first level, they can get very, very scary potent and fairly easily. Then again, non-spellcasters can get pretty potent pretty quickly too, actually. Which isn't bad, it's just more heroic than you'd think it would be. RuneQuest, now this was the game that always caught my attention for a role-playing game. And concept of Bronze Age, this really, really rich backstory where the gods are all worked into the game very intricately. Everything is based on the culture, the religion, the technology. It's all there in a way that most of the games aren't. The D&D kind of set the mold of, I'm into fighting and I'm into casting spells. Well, in RuneQuest, all of that came from your cultural background and your religious background. And that excited the hell out of me. Unfortunately, it also had ducks in it, and Jacobears, and really, really silly stuff up there with the SPI swords and spells. Luckily, SPI didn't put that stuff in Dragon Quest. Is it Dragon Quest? I can't remember the name. Yeah, Dragon. They didn't really put that stuff too heavily in Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest tries to pretend to be kind of serious. RuneQuest never tried to pretend to be serious in that way. They put all these really silly creatures in, and when you look at the map, there's a giant footprint where some god stomped into chaos, and just some really weird things in there that make it feel incredibly silly. Sillier than, say, Warhammer feels. On the other hand, they have this tremendous richness, and there was always this conflict there. Unfortunately for me, I could never present the game I wanted to in RuneQuest. Oh, jumping back to Rolemaster, the thing I was talking about over in we did Thieves World, and designed the whole, I was shocked with at least, all of the companions and stuff. I didn't have all this stuff. I borrowed a lot of this stuff. But once I started looking at all the books, like Companion 5 and stuff like that, I was able to see, damn it, if I limit the spells that people have and take the right choices here, I can match this world in a way that, no other game. So that flexibility was a tremendously impressive thing to me. But going back to RuneQuest, yeah, every time I'd play it, it felt like such a silly game that I couldn't really give it the level of attention that I felt it wanted for its cultural, for its religious, for whatever attitudes and constructs it had in it. Also, the system, with its very, very heavy ideas of skill basis, right? Where every time you do something, you roll a skill, same as Rolemaster there. But Rolemaster was a more serious feeling game. The fact that when you did something, you wanted to get a mark on it, kind of like the dots that I was talking about, so that you could roll to improve it. Because at the end of every day or adventure or whatever, you got to roll dice to see if you went up in something you successfully used. So you'd have people going, and I mean, obviously very silly, but you'd have people, because it got worse than what you'd think. So you'd have people going into combat with their main weapon. Wham, they hit with it. They drop it and grab another weapon, okay, so that they can improve in skill in that. And you would say, okay, that's just, being ridiculous, right? Why would you want to do that? Here's why. Because for particular religions, etc., in order to advance, this isn't a matter of, I want all my skills to be good. In order to advance, your skills had to be good. You had to have 90% or more in, say, multiple weapons to become a rune lord. Well, the only way to do that is every chance you have to go up, make sure you've attacked with both of them. And what do you do? Well, you drop a weapon. Now, that's great if one's a missile weapon and one's a hand weapon, but some of them had more than two. Parry can count, etc. But people would just, do really weird, silly stuff because of that. And you also saw that, I saw this in Universe all the time, where people were just using skills, to get these chances to upgrade them. You didn't see that so much in Rolemaster, because in Rolemaster, the only thing that you got for using a skill was maybe some experience points if people were rigorously keeping track of everything. And you wouldn't get that for routine usage. Now, routine usage, you don't get a chance to go up. But I saw in Universe where we were, I can remember one where we were welding people, to the walls, and had to make a roll to successfully, weld together harnesses to keep them in place. But because every time you roll a 0, you get a potential to go up, you get some experience points in it, we kept doing it and kept doing it. And that, was kind of a, wait a minute, it was fine to let you do this once, but you can't keep getting experience in it for this one action that you're doing. But it was like, well, there's a danger if we fail here. So the argument here is it's the same as combat, right? In terms of the risk to reward. But the thing is, what are you learning? And skill systems are one of the things that I really wanted to talk about with role-playing games in general. Because they usually don't make a damn bit of sense. And that's really what I was trying to design as one of the big parts of my game, was something that made sense in terms of, hey, I've got this learning curve, but I've got actions I'm taking. So for example, if I pick up a bow and start shooting it, if I've never shot a bow before, I'm really crappy. After about an hour, I'm pretty decent compared to that. I mean, just this huge increase, right? I mean, my learning goes way up, and then it kind of plateaus. And starts growing much, much more slowly. After a few days of this, after a few weeks, the improvement's never going to be as drastic as it was at first, but it just continues and continues. But here's the thing, I don't remember how to shoot a bow. My body learns this. I may somewhere subliminally remember part of that through all my life. So if I pick it up again, it would only take me a week to get much, much better, maybe what the first 2 years took of shooting. But I can't just pick it up and shoot like I did, 20 years ago, right? And there is this long remembering, practicing, that has to be accounted for. Now compare that to some other things, mental disciplines, for example. I would assume playing chess is similar. I can't really say for sure, but it feels, I'm thinking actually Go here, it feels like it's got a similar curve, maybe a little bit slower to grow. That's easy. You put a difficulty in. Swimming. Well, swimming's kind of interesting. I mean, I can pick up a bow and still shoot it, but I'd be pretty bad. But after years without swimming, I could still swim. Maybe not as well, but fairly well. I mean, it's to the idea, And then there's body deterioration when you don't do things. So for example, if you're laying in bed for a couple of weeks and you don't move, even just walking can be kind of difficult. And then other mental things that really, it feels like you almost have to relearn them at a very much the same rate. So like history. I feel like to get the grasp of history that maybe I once had, when I was terribly interested in studying it, I'd have to study it all over again. Some little nuggets are lost in there somewhere and it'll come up. It may be a little easier. But overall, unlike the physical skills and even the pure mental skills, knowledge skills deteriorate in a different sort of way. And so the idea was to capture all this. And for my game, I ended up using logarithmic functions of various types with the difficulty ratings, with different ratings that worked with different logarithms. And it was very, very weird. And you really couldn't play it without a powerful calculator in terms of changing your character values. That was the eventual level of it. And you had to expend time as a character to maintain all your skills. It was just too much. On the other hand, on the other side of things, something like Vampire, with its very, very simple system, not a lot of skills, and those that they have all operate the same way, simple roles, feels like it works better. And if you have to take something away from someone, you can just take it away from them. You can say, you no longer have this ability anymore. You've lost it in exchange for maybe something else or whatever. You're not just hosed out of it, but you're no longer the person that you once were. You're maybe, don't have these skills that you once used to practice all the time. I think a system that took that into account at a lighter level and actually endorsed the idea that you can't keep all your skills all the time would be really, really great. That's not the one I was trying to design, unfortunately. The one I was trying to design involved keeping track of every minute of your character's life, basically, in an abstract sort of way, but it was painful. Anyway, I'm going to wrap that one up. I guess I'll do my abstracts just to give some idea of those, although I'm even less enthusiastic about them.